Kade paced through the tiny airport. He made his way from the check-in counter, prowled past the car rental agencies, turned sharply at the loaned baggage carousel, then retraced his steps and did it again. Note to self, he thought. Confirm the flight's on time before leaving. Not that it mattered. He wasn't going anywhere. There was no danger of him missing a flight. He'd be staying right there in Lost Creek. Still, arriving at the airport to find he was 90 minutes early hadn't been the best of surprises, especially when his phone battery was at 17%. He'd read until it had dropped into the single digits, then attempted to occupy himself with other things. Nowhere nearby was worth the drive to help kill time. A milk frother whirred, and an espresso machine gurgled in the cramped coffee shop he'd passed at least 10 times. Roasted beans and creamy froth beckoned him, but there was no point in getting a cup. It'd be bland and dull, as flavorless and muted as everything he'd eaten and drunk over the last few days. The air should have been filled with the heavenly aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Instead, it was the olfactory equivalent of a blank slate, mocking his inability to register even the strongest of scents. He told himself that, on the plus side, it was also saving him from the stench of harsh disinfectants and people who'd been traveling too long. But sense of smell was an integral part of being a wolf shifter, and the sudden lack was unsettling, leaving him off-kilter ever since the spirit had. He breathed in as he reached a tall bank of windows, each and every one sealed shut, then pivoted on his heel to stalk back to the ticket counter. His body might have healed, but not all his senses had recalibrated yet. Thankfully, his hearing had returned to normal, as had his sight and perception of touch. He focused on the hiss of the air conditioning vents and the brush of that slight breeze against his skin. Tiny airport or not, it was still a large open room with plenty of clean air in it. Clean air and not much else. Sunlight streamed through the windows, giving the wooden floors a warm glow. The whole place was remarkably modern, despite its location in a remote corner of the Rocky Mountains. A lot of money had been spent on the minuscule number of people who used it, likely no more than 100 or so passengers on any given day. At least the architecture and decor were interesting. Not an hour's worth of interesting, but better than the dated designs he'd been expecting from such a rural airport. The sole rack of travel brochures had held his attention for a whole of 2 minutes until he'd realized he'd been to every place they advertised, all local and nothing he cared to see twice. Places he dragged Victor to when they were younger, rarely more than a few hours' drive away. Was it too much to ask for a tropical island or a World Heritage Site? Maybe glossy pictures of white sand beaches and azure waters? Something different from the snow-covered mountains and wind-swept plains he'd grown up around? Probably. Welcome to the middle of nowhere. Wouldn't you rather be somewhere else? Wasn't exactly a winning tourism campaign in the making. He really should have checked the arrival times. Rolling his shoulders, he continued his circuit, each lap a ritual of frustration and impatience, but no amount of pacing seemed to alleviate the itch gnawing at him. Usually, he only got this restless on a full moon, when his wolf's need to run shivered through him. But that wasn't the case now. This simmering inside him, this too-tight feeling of his skin, it was entirely human. It had to be human. There was nothing more to him than that at the moment. His wolf's absence cut deeper than losing his sense of taste and smell. It had taken the bulk of the damage when he'd been. Kade inhaled, concentrating on the air entering his lungs, then slowly exhaled. Without his wolf, everything was off. Everything was wrong. He'd never felt like this before. So incomplete. So broken. God, how lame was he? How pathetic. Who'd ever heard of a wolf shifter with a defective wolf? One who couldn't smell. It had to be temporary. His wolf must be in some kind of hibernation while it healed. Anything else was unimaginable. His mind shied away from the thought of losing such a huge part of himself, of never experiencing the pleasure-pain of transformation again, of being stuck forever in his human form. He scoffed. After what he'd done to Victor and Elijah, after trying to rip them apart when they'd just found each other, it wasn't like he didn't deserve it. He should have been stronger, should have stopped the spirit from. Invisible bands tightened around his chest, and he forced himself to take a deep breath, casting about desperately for a distraction. In the coffee shop, the barista leaned against the counter, his eyes tracking Kade's journey. He wasn't hiding how blatantly he was ogling Kade. Well, that would have helped pass the time.